I didn't realize something was wrong at first. It didn't hit me right away after I left my marriage. It showed up in small ways, things that just didn't make any sense. Like, I'd go somewhere simple, the grocery store, run an errand, even something as simple as just the drive home from work. And it was nothing major. And I'd feel a sense of dread that would take my breath away, like I needed to hurry up and get back home. Not like I was busy, and not like I had anything better to do or anything to do at all. Just this constant feeling like I needed to rush. And the weird part was there was nothing waiting for me when I got there. Nothing. And I didn't understand why that was. Why it was happening to me at the time. I didn't deal with anxiety before all of that. I didn't deal with depression. I never had any of that before. I wasn't someone who avoided things or felt uncomfortable just being out. That just wasn't me. Before that, well, I was the opposite of that. I had plans. I had things I was working toward. I had a lot of different interests. Things I enjoyed doing and things I stayed busy with. I was, always doing something, always thinking ahead in a good way, not trying to avoid something, but building something. That's just who I was. And that's why this didn't make any sense to me. And somewhere in that relationship, little by little, that started to fade. I didn't notice it happening at the time. It just slowly became normal. And that's the part I missed. I stopped doing things I used to enjoy and even stopped thinking the same way I always had. And by the time I got out of it, I wasn't that person anymore. But I didn't realize how much that it had actually changed me until after I left that marriage. Because that's when it started showing up in ways that I didn't recognize at first. I'd be out somewhere, and instead of just being there, I was thinking about leaving. I was thinking about getting back home, thinking about being done, even if I had just gotten there. It wasn't obvious. It just showed up in how I was living day to day. And I didn't question it right away. Um, I just thought maybe I was tired. Maybe I just needed time. Maybe it was just part of everything I had gone through. But it didn't go away. It stayed. And it wasn't just the grocery store or the things that I've mentioned. It was literally everywhere. I stopped wanting to go places altogether. And not because I couldn't, but because it just felt easier not to. It felt easier to stay home. Felt easier to not deal with that feeling at all. And over time, that starts turning into something that you don't notice that's even happening right away. But you start pulling back from things little by little. And I didn't see it clearly when I was in it. I just knew something felt off. Something wasn't the same. And it took me a while to understand what it actually was because it didn't feel like fear and it didn't exactly feel like panic. It was just this constant pressure to get back. And one day it finally hit me. I remember thinking, what am I even rushing home to? Because there's nothing there. There's no situation, no tension, no reason. But my body didn't know that. My mind didn't know that. I had spent so long living in something where I had to be on edge where I had to, think ahead about literally everything. Where I had to, manage how things were going to go. That even when it was over, I was still operating like I was right in the middle of it. That doesn't just shut off. It doesn't just go away because you leave. You carry parts of it with you. And that's why I was standing in a grocery store feeling like I needed to leave. And for me, that showed up as not being able to relax anywhere at any time. Even in my own space, there was still this feeling like something just wasn't settled. And that's when I started to see it. I started to see it all differently. It wasn't about where I was. It wasn't about what I was doing. It was how I had been conditioned to live. Always thinking ahead, always trying to keep things from turning. And when that's gone, you don't immediately go back to normal. You have to learn how to slow down again. And that sounds simple, but it's not. If you've ever felt that, it probably doesn't make sense. Because when you've been in that kind of environment long enough, being calm feels unfamiliar. It's almost uncomfortable. So you end up recreating that urgency without even realizing it. That's what I was doing. I wasn't rushing home because I needed to. I was rushing because I didn't know how not to. And that's when it finally clicked for me. And that took time to figure out. It didn't happen overnight. It was like little realizations like that, over time that started to change things. I started catching it. I started noticing it when it was happening. And I started asking myself, why why am I rushing right now? And most of the time there wasn't a reason. That's when it really started to shift. It wasn't all at once, but enough to where I could start slowing it down. And and that's when I realized something bigger. I didn't just walk away from something that wasn't right. I walked away from something that had changed how I lived without me even realizing it. And that part doesn't get talked about enough. People talk about leaving and they talk about getting out, especially out of an abusive relationship. But they don't talk about what comes after that. What it actually feels like when it's over. And you're still dealing with the effects of it. And and that's been a big part of this whole process for me. Figuring out not just what I went through, but what it did to me, and how to move forward from that. Because it's not just about starting over. It's about learning how to live differently, all over again. And that's something that I'm still working through now, but at least now I see it. And once you see it, you can actually start changing it. If you don't understand where this comes from, my prior video was about narcissistic abuse. Start there.